Hello, everyone. My name is Pablo Gonzalez. I'm the Managing Director of Latin America Research. Here at FrontierView, we've just released our global events to watch for 2023, looking at a range of disruptive events that could have a significant impact on multinationals across all regions. And in addition to that, we're here to discuss what specific events could unfold, not just globally, but within LATAM. As a reminder, these events do not represent our base case for next year. As such, you will see that the likelihood percentages that we have range from 10% to 40%. Although if these things do happen because they will have a significant impact to businesses, we believe that companies should build these disruptions into their scenarios and contingency plans for 2023. The chart that you're seeing right now is showing our global events to watch, and Mariana will talk about those in a minute. The x-axis is measuring the likelihood that these events will occur. The y-axis, how quickly they could impact businesses. And the size of the bubble is really trying to measure the scale of business impact for multinationals in the case these events do take place. So with this context, I just wanted to do that introduction. It's my pleasure to invite one of our senior analysts of my team to this conversation. So Mariana, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me, Pablo.
So let's just go straight to the point. There's really two things we need to discuss. One is the global events for next year, and then those that could originate within LATAM. So let's start talking about the global events. Mariana, what would be, there's a lot of things on this page, obviously, but how would you summarize which of these events are important for LATAM and why?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Pablo. So as you said, of course, there are a lot of events in this page and a lot of events that our global team is closely monitoring that could impact the global story, right? And these events are all important and could have a bearing on what happens in Latin America. But I think when we're thinking about the business impact and the impact to GDP growth across the region, probably the main events for companies to watch have to do with commodity prices, food supply disruption, oil prices. So just to kind of highlight what I think are probably the top three most important, I will start with just the oil price global event. So in this situation, we'd consider an event where oil prices would spike above $130 per barrel, right? This would be a situation in which perhaps we see Russia limit supply or supply cuts from OPEC, whilst consumption remains high. This would have a mixed effect on Latin America, right? We have a lot of net energy importers, net oil importers in the region like Argentina, Peru, Chile, that would be negatively impacted by this type of spike. We'd see increased prices trickle down through the economy. We'd see another push on prices, right? Increasing inflation even higher. But on the flip side, we do have markets where an oil price spike could have a positive impact. Colombia, Ecuador, Mexico to an extent, strong oil industries, oil exporters that would be benefited by a price spike could benefit from increased revenues and really use that to use their fiscal position to sort of ease developing situations at a domestic level. The second I would say is food supply disruptions. I think if we were to see, for instance, the grain deal with involving Ukraine and Russia fall apart, right? If we were to see countries begin to implement export bans on foods or even specific climate events like droughts and such impacting global food supply levels, that would be a disruption that would be negative across Latin America, and that would be quite significant, driving up food prices, driving up inflation, and of course creating the likelihood of triggering social unrest in these cases, which would create additional political instability. And it's a similar story for commodity prices. If we were to see commodity prices plummet, For instance, in a scenario where we see a really severe global recession, in recessions in the EU, US, slowdown in China and India GDP, right? That could create a tough situation across Latin America, considering we have so many markets that are commodity exporters. So this would affect trade volumes, of course, affect revenues in terms of prices of these commodities. So if we're looking at iron ore, base metals, or even grain or oil commodities, as we've spoken about previously. So I think these are probably the top three to monitor.
Okay, great. And they sound familiar because we've been suffering from these disruptions throughout the pandemic, beginning out of the pandemic and into 2022. So definitely not completely out of the woods from a global perspective. So now let's talk about events that could unfold within LATAM. And I can see more green here on this slide than on the previous one. So the first question for you is, do you feel that LATAM has more upside than other regions in 2023?
Yeah, I do. I would say that we definitely see more upside in Latin America than we do at a global level and across other regions. Most of the disruptions we see at a global level are, of course, important, but the domestic disruptors have more to do with political situations within the region. So I would say our bias is to an extent to the upside. We've seen Latin America outperform even more so than other regions. And to that effect, we could definitely see Latin America position itself as one of the most stable regions that has the highest levels of investment attractiveness relative to, for instance, China and the GDP slowdown that we're seeing there. Of course, the situation in Europe or FX instability and inflation in the Middle East and North Africa, for instance.
Mm. And I think that covers very one of the big bubbles. LATAM concentrates EM investments, so you need to talk about that one. I guess nearshoring Dublin, Mexico's FDI, I think is also related to that one. And I think people will understand how well Mexico is positioned to attract nearshoring. So let's talk about the other two that you have here in green. So you have substantial easing of Venezuela's sanctions and then the USMCA trade dispute being settled. Would you mind commenting very quickly on those two?
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of the sanctions on Venezuela, right, these sanctions have kind of long handicapped Venezuela's oil industry in particular, but the economy more generally. If we were to see the Maduro administration, which of course, as you said, is not our base case, move towards kind of more democratic norms, right, in the country, we could see a situation where some sanctions are eased, which would establish a little bit more stability at a regional level relating to Venezuela, and of course, potentially help Venezuela begin to pull itself out of the economic crisis that it's been in for the past decades. If we look at the other event, the USMCA trade dispute being settled, we're definitely classifying that as lower likelihood than the easing of sanctions in Venezuela. I think we very much expect the AMLO administration to remain steadfast in its energy policy at the moment, which is at the core of this trade dispute. But if AMLO were to kind of move away from that, were to consider the cost of sparring with the US to be too high for what he wants to do, then we could see the trade dispute be settled, and this could help increase competition from Canadian and US firms in the local market, particularly when it comes to clean energy.
Okay, perfect. Well, hopefully this happens. Actually, all those four things happen. So now let's talk about the negative events. And the biggest value you actually have is Brazil removing all fiscal anchors. Is very low likelihood, but what would this be about?
Yeah, absolutely. I think everyone in the region is really bracing themselves to see what the third Lula administration starting next year would bring. I think overall, our base case scenario definitely includes Brazil kind of relaxing its fiscal framework, right? We're very much expecting spending to continue inching up. But if we were to see a situation where there is no limit to how much spending can increase each year, because that limit does exist now, that could really destabilize the fiscal situation in Brazil, which is already quite worrying, right? And in terms of the practical effects of that, we could definitely see currency depreciation become a big problem, inflation tick up, of course, if we're kind of opening the door for increased, potentially unlimited spending, and just larger budget cuts, larger tax increases than we're already expecting during the Lula administration.
Yeah, and clients will remember what happened with Dilma Rousseff in 2015-16 because Brazil didn't do what they needed to do in terms of fiscal responsibility. Then that was sort of a self-inflicted recession back then. So hopefully we don't see that either. So the last question I have for you is, if I look at all the others, whether they're red or yellow, which we can talk about why they're yellow, they're referred to political transitions, most of them in LATAM. So how would you summarize all of those?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think Latin America is no stranger to political instability, but we definitely have situations unfolding across the region that could kind of change the political status quo, right? In Peru and in Ecuador, we're seeing presidents that have been significantly weakened, who are facing impeachment challenges, who could face removal from their positions. In Argentina, Argentina is sort of the last market that's likely to see an election in this electoral wave, right? So that could really change the types of policies implemented. And then Chile is facing a potential constitutional rewrite after the constitution failed to pass last year. So all of these are domestic events that could kind of switch what the status quo has been in terms of policy continuity. And they're certainly important to monitor, but potentially less impactful at a regional level and less impactful to kind of business operations within each of the countries, Argentina, of course, accepted.
Okay, so I guess to my previous comment, why do you have Castillo's impeachment and a right-wing victory, and outsider actually winning Argentina's elections in yellow?
Yeah, so those are definitely events that would have mixed effects. Castillo's impeachment, for once, I think would be positive in the long run, or at least has the potential to be positive in the long run if the Castillo administration is replaced by an administration that's more capable of efficiently managing the government, potentially even market friendly. But of course, in the short term, we're seeing a lot of destabilization, another change in president, more political uncertainty in Peru, and that's going to weigh on business sentiment. It's going to weigh on the soul. So it's definitely a mixed effect event. It's a similar situation with Argentina. When we talk about a right-wing outsider winning the Argentina elections, we're not referring to someone within the Macri camp, for instance, that's an establishment politician who would pursue some level of policy continuity. We're looking at someone like Javier Milei, who would implement more of a shock therapy approach, which, it's up for debate whether that would be beneficial in the long run. It certainly would help adjust some of Argentina's macroeconomic challenges, but it could be really destabilizing in the short run, both from an economic standpoint and from a protest standpoint, right?
Got it. Well, I think, Maria, you did an amazing job trying to summarize all these, both global and domestic events in just over 10 minutes. So I wanted to thank you for your time. And we actually do have more details on each of these factors. So if you haven't, you can download the Global Events to Watch report. And there's going to be an Insight Bite ready by, I think, December 1st, where clients will be able to read descriptions of all of this here on this page. So thank you very much, Mariana, thank you very much to all of our clients for
Thank you.
paying attention to this video, and have a great rest of your week.